may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
All right, so earlier this week, we went through and we talked about some other second-year wide receivers. And if you weren't able to check out that video, I essentially want to give a quick intro on why we are talking about second-year wide receivers. And essentially, if you look at redraft leagues over the past 6 or 7 years, you actually find that year 2 wide receivers across all wide receiver years have the highest win rate in what you are expecting for a breakout. Now, I know, especially in those dynasty leagues, we have been told for so long now that year 3 is the year of the full-on breakout at the wide receiver position. And I don't know if that was actually the case 20 years ago or so. I mean, I'm not looking at research that long back, but maybe it's something to do with just how advanced colleges now are with the progression of these wide receivers, getting them a little bit more ready for the NFL before they get there. That way, instead of it being the year 3 breakout, it's actually the year 2. But yeah, anyway, last video, we had a lot of requests for us to talk about Chase Claypool, Brandon Ayuk, Denzel Mims, Henry Ruggs. And I promise y'all guys, I mean, it's a long summer. We are going to be talking about every single one of these year 2 wide receivers. I just want to break it up piece by piece. That way we can just dive in depth. I mean, I don't want to be just hitting the highlights. I don't want to just be doing a quick summary of these players. I'd rather be doing some more in-depth analysis. So yeah, of course, before we get into it, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And I want to remind everyone, June 19th, we have a Austin, Texas flock meetup at Zilker Park at 6 p.m. Please, if you can make it out, come out. I will be there. Hopefully, a lot of other people who are fans of the channel and a part of the flock will be as well. Just go to Zilker, look for me, look for a giant white-ass dog, and I'm sure you will find us within 5 minutes. But anyway, let's dive into it, and let's bring up our first wide receiver in Chase Claypool here. So Chase Claypool in redraft leagues this upcoming season is being drafted as the 28th wide receiver off the board. Now, if you look at wide receivers going in the same range, I mean, you have Kenny Golladay, T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, all going right before Chase Claypool. Then you have Claypool himself, and afterwards, you have Juju, Courtland Sutton, Odell Beckham Jr. So really, you're finding that this is one large tier of these wide receivers. I mean, if you're sitting in a draft, you shouldn't be too surprised by seeing these guys go in any particular order. And we just kind of have to ask ourselves, should we be chasing the upside of Chase Claypool? Because you look at him and, oh my God, I mean, if Kyle Pitts doesn't look like Megatron, at least Chase Claypool does here. Chase Claypool, 23 years old this season. So obviously this is someone you're expecting to still progress. 6'4", 238 pounds. So an absolute monster. I mean, 6'4", 238 pounds. And obviously, that is freakish size. And usually with those bigger wide receivers, you're not necessarily expecting them to be elite level athletes. But no, Claypool here ran a 4.42 40-yard dash. That is absurd. You literally never, ever see this type of size-adjusted athleticism that Chase Claypool has. So that's the first thing you have to point out whenever you're talking about a freak athlete like this. But we know that the wide receiver position, unlike the running back position, here you really care about production. You really care about what you've seen with the usage of the wide receiver in their respective NFL offense, because we talk about this all the time. I mean, one of the reasons we loved Antonio Gibson coming into last year's NFL draft is that at the running back position, literally all you need is you need size, pass catching ability, and athleticism. And most of the time, you're going to get there because we know there's not much to learn. Hey, you see a hole, you run as fast as you can through it. And we already know skill positional players can make defenders miss in the open field. Some are better at it than others, but generally that's a trait they're going to be able to develop. But at the wide receiver position, I mean, it is so much more complicated. There, you have to go through, you have to develop your route running, you have to be able to generate separation, and you have to be able to really know the playbook. Here, Claypool, focusing on the production, it wasn't that good last year. Now, we go through and we look at what exactly happened. So I know that if you go and just look at the overall season, it's not that disappointing. But what I want to focus in on is I want to focus in how it trailed off at the very end. And we know this goes with Ben Roethlisberger. Ben Roethlisberger is going to be a major piece of the puzzle here. But if you look at the second half of the season, Chase Claypool was actually the wide receiver in 42 in points per game. So obviously someone you're not wanting to start on a weekly basis if he's going to be a wide receiver 4 for your team. Now you go through and focus in a little bit later than that. So how is he trending? Because you want to see those rookies trending in the correct direction. That way going into year 2, they have that momentum and you have something to build on. Well, in the last month of the season, Chase Claypool was actually the wide receiver 79 in points per game. So obviously something you are not liking to see. And some bad news here with Chase Claypool is he actually had 2 rushing touchdowns as well last season, which is not going to happen this upcoming year. I mean, they bring in Najee Harris. They're not going to be putting Chase Claypool in there to get carries at the goal line. So take away those 2 rushing touchdowns. We know that's variance. That's not going to be there. So if you took those away for his production last year, I mean, those numbers would be even a little more disappointing. But a major reason for this fall at the end of the season is Ben Roethlisberger had his arm give out on him. I mean, Ben Roethlisberger could not push the ball down the field. We all saw this against the Cleveland Browns in the playoffs. Now you go through and let's try to identify how bad Ben Roethlisberger was last year. We know this team started undefeated. They were undefeated for a very long time. But if you look at the overall season, not even just in the second half, but on the entire year, Ben Roethlisberger actually posted a 6.3 yards per pass attempt mark. Now, I know a lot of people aren't familiar with those stats, and if that's impressive, neutral, or disappointing, well, let me go through and look at his 16-year career. Okay, so keep in mind, Ben Roethlisberger played the entire season last year, and he posted a 6.3 yards per pass attempt mark. And out of his 16-year career, the second lowest mark that he has had after this one was 7.0. So Ben Roethlisberger was over 10% worse than his second worst season of his entire career. I mean, that is a massive fall from Ben Roethlisberger. And to be honest, at least I have not read any reports this offseason that should make us feel like we're a little bit more excited about Ben Roethlisberger this upcoming year. There's nothing that indicates that Ben Roethlisberger should be trending in the correct direction, which really is a bummer because this is going to be an offense with so many weapons. I mean, obviously they add in Najee Harris. They bring back Juju Smith-Schuster. So all of a sudden, if you go through this roster and you're looking at the leaders in receiving yards from last year, I mean, you have Deontay Johnson at 923, Chase Claypool at 873, Juju 831, Ebron 558, James Washington 392. They bring back everybody. They add a workhorse running back, a running back that's going to be significantly better in the passing game than any of these options were at the position last year. And you're going, this is one of the best wide receiver rooms in the entire NFL. They have some of the best pieces in this offense in the entire NFL. Yet the quarterback play is going to be atrocious. So you have to ask yourselves, I mean, is the situation going to be there for Chase Claypool to break out this upcoming season? And I simply don't see it happening because when you have weapons like this in an offense, we can automatically assume that Chase Claypool isn't going to be getting the volume. We can automatically assume that Chase Claypool does not have it in his range of outcomes to ever come close to getting over 25% of the team's targets for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that's fine. I mean, you can be a highly productive wide receiver without getting that elite level volume. But what you need is you need great quarterback play. You need those targets to come and be extremely efficient to make up for the lack of volume. And given the fact that Ben Roethlisberger had a complete meltdown at the last part of the season, given the fact that his yards per pass attempt were so much lower than any other point throughout his entire NFL career, he's 39 years old. I mean, I think that Chase Claypool is a wide receiver that I'm probably going to be staying away from in this range, to be completely honest. I hate to start the video off in this tone, but I mean, he's going right behind Brandon Ayuk. He's going right ahead of Juju, Cortland Sutton, Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, I do not think I can be drafting Chase Claypool in that range. Now let's go over to a wide receiver that I already have a bet against this offseason. Let's talk about Darnell Mooney. Now, if y'all don't come out to the live streams very often, y'all probably missed the bet that we made on the live stream a couple weeks ago, where I said if Darnell Mooney, I believe the mark was a top 15 wide receiver in fantasy. If he was the top 15 wide receiver in fantasy, I would pour an entire beer in whatever shoe I was wearing. I would live stream me drinking the entire thing out of the shoe because it's simply not happening here with Darnell Mooney. And I hate to be the Debbie Downer, but if we go through this profile, I do not see the path for elite level upside, or even just say top 20 wide receiver upside, where you're looking at Darnell Mooney. And right now he is going at 135 overall in these drafts. So he's going to be an 11th, 12th round pick, and he's going as the 51st wide receiver off the board. And with Mooney, I will be the first person to admit that his prospect profile was a lot better than I initially thought whenever he broke out last season. I mean, he comes out, he runs a 4.38 40-yard dash, which we all knew that this is a player that had that elite level speed. Yes, he is very, very, very slight, and that's one of the reasons I kind of want to be fading Darnell Mooney this season, where he's only 5'10", 176 pounds. So he's in that Devonta Smith range. And with Devonta Smith, at least you can say on one hand that Smith was the best college wide receiver of all time at Alabama in 2020. So you can say, hey, maybe he's extremely undersized, but at least we have this star-studded bullet point on his resume. Well, Darnell Mooney just doesn't have that to make up for the fact that he is this small. He's already 23 years old. He was drafted at the very end of the 5th round last year, so we already know historical hit rates on a wide receiver drafted there are not great to begin with, throw in the fact that he's this size, and I mean, you have some serious questions. And if you're looking at where he's exactly going in fantasy drafts right now, I mean, there are some other wide receivers I definitely prefer over Darnell Mooney in this range. I mean, he is going behind Corey Davis. He's going one pick ahead of McCole Hardman, and I can't get behind either one of those selections going behind Darnell Mooney. Now, of course, we can't just look at what happened in Chicago, because Darnell Mooney, he had an entire 4-year career before he got to the NFL, so we kind of have to evaluate him as a prospect as well. So he broke out his true sophomore season, which you definitely love to see. I mean, that's the mark that we established over there in our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide. But he averaged 54 receiving yards a game in his true junior season. He had 4 total touchdowns. His junior year, he bumped that up to 76 receiving yards a game, had 8 total touchdowns. Senior year actually has a down year, but comes out and in 2020 was more impressive than anybody thought he was going to be. I mean, I bet you Darnell Mooney didn't think he was going to be putting up these stats, where he averaged 6 targets a game, 3.8 receptions, 39 yards a game, and he had 4 total touchdowns across a 16-game season. So this was good for a wide receiver 71 finish in points per game. But unlike Chase Claypool, what you actually like to see here with Darnell Mooney is the fact that he was trending in the correct decision near the end of the season. I mean, he finished as wide receiver 71 overall, but before the bye week, he was actually wide receiver 82 in points per game. And after his bye week passed, he was wide receiver 52. So you do see the sharp difference in what you had with the beginning of the season to the end of the season, which you love to see with those rookies. And I'm looking at Darnell Mooney and I'm going, I think he's more so just a product of the fact that Chicago really had no options to get the ball to in the receiving game last year. I mean, they had Allen Robinson, who you can easily make the argument that Allen Robinson is the top 6 wide receiver in the NFL. I mean, A-Rob had over 1,200 receiving yards. Darnell Mooney was next best on this team. Then you had Anthony Miller, Jimmy Graham, and David Montgomery. But now, this upcoming season, you're going to have Cole Kmet coming up and actually progressing. I'd imagine that Cole Kmet is an improvement on what you had with Jimmy Graham last year. And you're also going to have Tariq Cohen coming back and being used as a weapon in the receiving game. We've seen Tariq Cohen be close to the top of this team in receiving yards and targets before. So don't be surprised if he's coming back and he is soaking up some of this passing volume. And the problem is, I just don't see it with Darnell Mooney. I don't see the jump that he has to being really anybody getting in consideration to be a top 24 wide receiver in fantasy. I mean, you look at the profile, you look at the fact that he was a late 5th round draft pick combined with his slight frame, and we go, you're essentially betting on Justin Fields here. You're not betting on Darnell Mooney, because if Darnell Mooney is going to be productive in fantasy, Justin Fields has to be one of the best rookie quarterbacks in the NFL. And if you think that Justin Fields is going to be that with Justin Fields and his own rushing upside, I mean, instead of drafting Darnell Mooney, go draft Justin Fields. Get the production to Allen Robinson, get the production to Darnell Mooney, and also get the rushing at the same time with Justin Fields. So I'm not drafting Darnell Mooney. I mean, if you are all in on this Chicago Bears offense, get the rushing quarterback. Don't be drafting a 176-pound wide receiver that was drafted in the 5th round of last year's draft. I just don't see the upside there. Now, where I do see some upside is going to be with the last guy we are talking about in Henry Ruggs. So obviously, if you're going to ask me, Mason, would you rather have Chase Claypool or Henry Ruggs straight up? I'm taking Claypool. But we're talking about the price point here. Now, Henry Ruggs going very, very, very late in fantasy drafts right now. I mean, surprisingly late if you go through and look at what happened his rookie season. So he is the youngest wide receiver on this list, only 22 years old. So he was only 21 last year in his rookie year. He was the first wide receiver off the board. And we understand that that doesn't necessarily mean he should be the most valuable guy in fantasy, because we know that you're expecting those NFL teams to value stuff a little bit differently than what we do in fantasy. Given the fact that Henry Ruggs has that 4.27 speed, he can stretch the field. He can make life easier for Darren Waller, Bryan Edwards, Josh Jacobs. I mean, and that's without getting a ton of fantasy production to Henry Ruggs himself. And Ruggs last year, very disappointing. I mean, he was the wide receiver 89 in points per game. He did this with 3.3 targets a game, 2 receptions, 35 total yards a game. But what we really have to focus in on is we have to focus in on Henry Ruggs getting injured with multiple different injuries at the beginning of the season, which kind of derailed his rookie year. I mean, he suffered a knee sprain in week 1. He suffered a hamstring strain in week 3 at the same time. So you're looking at Henry Ruggs and you're going, this is a 21-year-old wide receiver that suffered 2 lower body injuries to start the year. What are you going to be expecting from him? Is this someone that should be able to come back by week 6 and he should be able to consistently post 75 receiving yards a game? That's not what I would expect. What I would expect with Henry Ruggs is it would take him until year 2 to really get anything of value going. And you also look through this team and you go, okay, there are actually some targets opening up in Las Vegas. I mean, last year, the leading receivers on this team were Darren Waller at 1 with almost 1,200 yards. Then Nelson Agholor with 900 yards at 2. I mean, Nelson Agholor, 900 yards leaving the offense. Hunter Renfrow, we know he's playing the slot. Really don't have to worry about that with Henry Ruggs. Then Henry Ruggs was 4. So if you go through and you go, hey, if Henry Ruggs can build on what Nelson Agholor did, this is a wide receiver that has the potential to actually be a top 24 guy in fantasy. I don't necessarily see it with Darnell Mooney. I definitely would prefer having Henry Ruggs over him, even with Ruggs having the more disappointing rookie year. I think you have reasons to be excited. I mean, Las Vegas had the potential to bring in some wide receiver options. They decided not to do that. They didn't pursue a Juju Smith-Schuster. They didn't pursue a Will Fuller. Instead, they said, we were fine with Henry Ruggs. We drafted him 12th overall last year. He's going to be playing 100% of the snaps for us. This is an offense that only has Darren Waller really as a guy to target. So yeah, Henry Ruggs going to be my guy out of this list that I'm targeting. But thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, if y'all did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. I want to thank everybody who has recently decided to join the flock in Alex, Jack, Bud, Kevin, Connor, Caesar, Jonathan, Joseph, Jordan, and James. Thank you, my dudes.